And I will introduce Mr. Bland, and I will invite you to share who your team is with you today, and if you would like to answer the questions about whether or not this is a budget improvement, how it might impact service.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Joining me here at the head table is our board chair, Marion Ott, and our chief financial officer, Ed Oliphant. Also in the room in the first row is our director of community and government affairs, Eric Beyer, our chief administrative officer, Rita Roberts-Turner, and our chief operating officer, India Birdsong. So this year's budget is an improvement. It's going to allow us to do a few things. It's going to certainly allow us to continue full-year operation of our new Nolensville BRT Light service, which kicked off just a couple months ago and is doing extremely well in the Nolensville corridor. Will also allow us to kick off new feeder service on Thompson Lane, which is specifically an employment-centered service to connect transit riders to employment opportunities in that area of the city. Will also allow us to step up to some extent our asset maintenance program to upgrade the maintenance efforts we have, particularly on our fleet, and also accounts for the continued growth in our Access Ride door-to-door service for senior citizens and persons with disabilities. So in that sense, it is definitely allowing us to make further enhancements in mass transit service in Nashville. Let me
continue on.
Okay. Also, the base budget, particularly important just to give a perspective on the role of mass transit in Nashville. On an average month, we carry 825,000 one-way trips. We have now become the single largest transit operator in terms of ridership in the state of Tennessee. We just passed Memphis in that regard. Our Access Ride system is about 37,000 trips a month, also the largest such system in Tennessee. And the STRIDE program, our partnership with Metro Nashville Public Schools as well as Metro Nashville government, continues to grow and succeed at about 4,500 Metro school students per day using our system. 68% of our riders, to show the critical nature of mass transit to the economic well-being of Nashvillians, 68% of our riders indicate via survey information that they have no alternative access to transportation, so it truly is their lifelink. And 58% earn less than 30% annually. So in that sense, it is truly a link to the community. In terms of what we do and how we deliver it for value for the taxpayers, probably the best measure in our industry, in the mass transit industry, of efficiency and overall value is the measure total operating cost per revenue hour of service. In that regard, in this budget for the upcoming fiscal year, we're actually seeing that cost per hour decline relative to the current budget by about 1.4%. So in essence, for growth in budget, we're actually seeing a larger growth in service hours. We're going from $105.95 per revenue service hour to $104.51 per service hour. Which is extremely competitive and extremely positive when we look against our peer cities nationally. So with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions that the council might have on this budget. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first one, I guess, deals with maybe an overall concern for safety, both for the passengers, for the bus drivers, for people who work. Obviously, the incident at the Central Station. Anything in here that we need to be aware of in terms of trying to deal with? You can't handle all circumstances, but that type of situation.
Sure. Well, actually, after that incident, one of the things to keep in perspective is we have about 15,000 to 17,000 people a day pass through the terminal. And it certainly is a public facility. It is in no way it relies on being open to the public. So we were actually very encouraged by the response to the incident that day. I viewed the video of the incident literally within 8 seconds. There were Metro police officers on scene at the time. of the incident. There were 5 uniformed commissioned police officers as well as 3 security officers. So we continue to meet with Metro Police, Metro Nashville Public Schools to look at how we might enhance and learn from the experience. But frankly, it's, and even if you would talk to Chief Anderson, it's one of those freak occurrences. Frankly, we're more concerned, and a lot of what we've been talking to the school district, I see Abby from the Oasis Center is here, is how we partner in the broader issue of youth violence, gun violence, in Nashville, because frankly, even though it happened at that facility, it could have been a specific bus stop at a school. It could have been, really anywhere. But looking at it, one of the things that we also encourage in the message we've been trying to convey, and we're going to beef up some, is the message to all of our customers that they're really our best source of intelligence in the system. Again, with 8 security officers, which is really good coverage given the acreage. Well, if there's 15,000 people, we tend to get a lot of information from our customers about things that don't quite look right. And as a result, security in that building, as well as Metro Nashville Police, frankly, are able to head off a lot of potential issues.
And I know you can't deal with everything, but I guess it's the need for a presence of some sort. Is it Metro Police that does the security at the central station, or is it? Right. Or is it a combination of different factors that are going on?
It's a combination. We have a director of security who's actually a retired U.S. Marshal who runs security for the overall system, but he's based out of Music City Central. He in turn contracts with private security that is our base security, what I'll call our facility security, and then we also employ off-duty Metro Police officers for the commissioned officer presence. And then routinely, our security function works very closely with the commander of the central precinct on auxiliary patrols and, frankly, sharing of information and intelligence. And there's also that cooperation with school district security. To be frank, some of the incidents we have are related to the school student activity. So when they hear something in one of the schools that might be going on, they share that information with us. When our folks overhear things so there is that back and forth communication to the topic of collaboration among the departments and functions in Metro.
Okay. Access Ride, looks like you're getting some more money for Access Ride. Cost seems to be going up. Is that more people needing the services?
Yeah, it's a consistent, generally we're up in any given year 5 to 7%, and that's been pretty much unabated. So that's definitely more service. The other things we're going to be doing in the Access Ride arena in the upcoming year, we put a lot of attention on the real-time information on our fixed route system, but that will be rolling out over the course of the year to Access Ride, so we'll be able to do some service enhancements with that customer base as well.
And that's very good. That would be, I think, a very good thing for Access Ride. And I'll end with, obviously, we're looking at mass transit options and different things, and you all are right in the middle of that, and I know we'll be having continuing discussions on that. I guess my last question would be senior services, making sure that we don't forget to take a look at that. I know there's different groups taking a look at that as well, but in terms of making sure that transit is available to all our citizens, including the older population, I think is something that we need to keep an eye on.
Actually, when we've been doing the planning studies, seniors were a particular group we reached out to, and coming back to the collaboration piece, a lot of our actual penetration of senior ridership, not on Access Ride, it's fairly heavily used by seniors, but on the fixed route system is relatively low, and what we hear consistently from those groups is it's just tough to access the system because of the pedestrian infrastructure. So with Public Works updating the sidewalk master plan, we've been invited into that process. They've been very good about opening up that process, and that's one of the pieces of feedback we're providing, is that pedestrian access to the transit system is a key piece generally for transit ridership, but very specifically for that senior population, and frankly not just the sidewalk itself, but particularly challenging are the crossings in some of our main corridors, where, frankly, a lot of us don't move quite as quickly as we used to.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I think just listening to people, they do talk about just not getting access to the bus in terms of actually riding it, but getting across the street to get to the bus stop, knowing when the bus is coming, and making sure that they can actually get on the bus and get to where they need to go.
Yep.
So I'm glad you're all looking at that. We got a big couple of years ahead of us, I think, on all this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Shulman and Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I just want to say one more time, thanks for the real-time app. I was eager to have that arrive, and it's really fun to play with. And as summer approaches and the prospect of standing at a bus stop in 90-degree weather becomes real, it's great to know that you can only need to stand there for 2 minutes if you know when the bus is coming. So that's a really great thing. My one question would be about if anyone has done studies of the cost of access ride per driver, lane mile, or however you look at it, or trip, has anyone looked at whether it would be a more cost-effective program to simply pay for taxis? Or, I mean, is that something y'all look at from time to time? And
Well, taxis are actually a significant part of the program right now. We outsource about 20% of the trips to the taxi operators. We are in conversation with the rideshare, and actually this afternoon our board met to expand that contract because the usage of it is so high. So that's definitely a tool we have at our disposal, and then we're continuing, as has been pretty widely reported and through the budget process, continuing a dialogue with the rideshare operators about how, both for Access Ride and more broadly, how they might be integrated into the public transportation network.
great, so you're looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, and I just want to congratulate you all for becoming really such a part of the conversation in the community, and I think that's an important step. Along with this exciting app, in terms of using technology to help us along a little bit, if you'd spend a little bit of time on this Murfreesboro corridor smart traffic signal technology and the possibility of rolling that out in other corridors, particularly Public Works was just here with a $10 million move by the mayor for new signalization. Can that, in fact, go countywide?
Yeah. Actually, we were just meeting with folks from Public Works and Planning in the mayor's office on that a couple days ago, because there's another round of particular federal funding that's a real good target for. But in the Murfreesboro Road corridor, there are a number of improvements going on, the highest profile of which is replacement of the signal infrastructure. So and Mark didn't hang out. I sat through Mark's, so he should have stayed for mine, and I'll give him some trouble tomorrow about that. They would be much better able to talk about the architecture and the specifics, but really replacing the base hardware and base software for the signal system, as well the controllers, some mast arms, and very important and probably under talked about in this project is the fiber optic network. Because one of the issues, the way it essentially works is if you look at, say, our BRT light service in the Murfreesboro corridor, our onboard system, the same system that's driving real-time information, will detect things like passenger loads and performance against schedule to say, I've got a problem here and I need to notify the signal system that I need a little help. Right now, for real-time information, we're polling about every minute based on that cellular connection. With the fiber system, we'll be able to do that literally every couple of seconds, which is what the signal system needs in true real time. And then that has the opportunity to extend a green within a cycle or trigger an early green within a cycle without disrupting the overall flow of traffic. And because it's able to track that bus kind of in system to see growing problems, it's able to, this is going to be the wrong term, so the traffic engineers are going to beat me over the head for it, basically recalibrate, make sure that the entire network isn't driven out of sync just by virtue of letting one vehicle pass by. Also, part of that project is encompassing some sidewalk and crossing improvements, so pedestrian signals, ADA improvements, sidewalk connections between off-street locations and transit stops and that type of thing. But we think it will be a good model that's certainly transferable to really any of the major corridors, in Nashville.
But there's not currently a plan. So Murfreesboro Road is sort of a pilot program for this in effect, and then the goal is to match the schedule, not to have it go as fast as it possibly can.
Yeah, it's really the reliability. And one of the things we're getting off of the vehicle location system, and again, we did a briefing with the board today on Murfreesboro Road specifically, but we're actually, because we're collecting literally thousands of data points of schedule performance, we're identifying those log jams, where's the system really bottlenecking, frankly, where's it running too fast, where do we have to adjust times down? That actually happens too, believe it or not as often as the delays. So what customers really relate to, it'd be great to build speed in, and that's a lot of what we're talking about in the long-term plans with transit priority and those types of issues. But the key thing, coming back to Councilmember Allen's point about knowing when the bus is going to be here, is dependability is even coming up as a higher priority issue for riders than the overall speed issue, because most of our corridors, most of our local trips, leaving the regional system out of it, the Williamson counties and the Rutherford counties, the trips aren't tremendously long. But if it's not dependable, not reliable, that's where we run into trouble. So a lot of what we're looking at, for instance, one of the things we're looking at, we're still in design on Murfreesboro Road, is the concept of queue jumps. So potentially building just a short bike, rather than a full dedicated lane, it's a short bypass lane, and then the signal system gives the bus priority to pass by. So some of those types of innovations, that come short of a full, what I'd call a full build out of a bus rapid transit system, but that can make really strategic and high benefit to cost ratio types of improvements in the system.
Great. And then finally, you're feeling confident with the new shelter program of getting the attention from the sidewalks program of having sidewalks connect to your shelters.
Yeah, and I would have to certainly, I'd give credit to a lot of people, but certainly a theme in Mayor Barry's coming in is whatever you do, do it with somebody, everybody who's involved. So as Mark Macy and I kid each other, we've probably seen each other more in 6 months, than we'd seen in quite a while. So that's a very important piece. But I would say it also extends, talk about the sidewalk program. One of the things we talk about, best way to make for efficient transit, well-used transit, is when we're looking at the other municipal sightings. So if we're looking at new libraries, new community centers, new schools, the extent to which those can be located, it's not always possible, but the extent to which they can be located on primary transit lines gives the people using them, A, access to much better transit service, but B, it certainly saves the MTA and by extension the taxpayer a lot of money in us having to extend service to new areas. When we have to put out a new bus the bus itself will cost about $700,000 if we have to add a bus. But the rule of thumb is if we have to put a bus in service full time, that's about a $400,000 per year expense. So the extent to which we can have people have new development, new public facilities, and their consumers take up empty seats on existing service rather than putting out new service, that's always an economic advantage to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Van Rees.
I wanted to talk about the tech on the buses and what you're hoping to do more in regard to just collecting the data, obviously making it a little bit more rider-friendly. If it would that everyone had an easy pass kind of concept. But I'm also curious about grabbing the data in regard to point of origin and how that works with the current GSD and USD as to how many people are getting on the bus first in what area.
Right.
And of course, with the tech being able to actually figure out where their destination is.
Sure.
So if they're getting off before they get all the way in. So
Sure.
Can you tell us what you're doing now and how that affects this budget?
Sure. Well, in the current system, we have automated passenger counters tied in with vehicle location. So we get very good data on, say, boarding volume by stop, by route, by time of day, and you can tear that apart any way you want. And presently, we're working with Vanderbilt and the big brains at Vanderbilt to help us figure out how to take literally the millions of bits of data and turn it into actionable information, such as what we saw today on some of the bottleneck pieces. But it's anonymized data. When you step on a bus, it triggers a count. It doesn't know who you are, doesn't know where doesn't know your trip. So it's taking it on and off, but it doesn't know necessarily that you got on at the courthouse and got off on Gallatin Avenue somewhere. What some of the technologies are moving toward is an anonymized version of people essentially using their smartphones. So the type of app that Councilmember Allen uses, I activated to use the system. It detects that I got on a 26 bus here. It detects I got off and transferred to a 12, got off there. In an anonymous version, we don't know where she's going. And the theory behind that is being able to plan better for interlining. So if we're seeing tremendous volumes, one of the things we're seeing come up through the in-motion work is the desire from passengers for more direct services. In some cases, that's cross-town. Frankly, in some cases, it's through town. So if it's even a route that says, well, I might be at 26 going down Gallatin Road downtown, and then maybe I continue on as a, as a 12 out Nolensville Road or what have you. One of the things that the capital budget proposal that the mayor's put forth would allow us to start advancing is new fare collection technology. So that would allow us to start moving toward smart card, mobile payment systems and integration. We're working closely with the chief information officer and the mayor's Smart Cities initiative to make sure that ultimately those types of systems you can tie in parking payment or B-cycle payment or whatever the case might be, as those payment systems are brought up to speed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wiener. Hi, Director Bland. My question was, I guess I was surprised to see, and I'm embarrassed to say I've yet to watch your budget hearing. I've watched all the hearings up to this point, and I got behind. So I didn't get to kind of see what you were asking for kind of in an ideal world and how that fits in with your larger plans. But I know you all are thinking obviously very strategically through this in-motion process and working with the administration. But something you and I have talked about for a long time as it relates to our traffic problem. Our community is feeling the pain now, right? Whether they're sitting in traffic or whether we in neighborhoods are dealing with the resulting kind of ripple effect of people speeding through neighborhoods. And so I guess, I was maybe surprised to see that there's just $2 more million in your budget. And, I've long felt that we can move the needle significantly on our traffic problem if we increase our choice ridership. So I think you all are doing an excellent job, serving those folks for whom this is their only option. But I know there's kind of capital stuff and operational. I was hoping to see maybe on some potentially popular routes that don't have the BRT, an increase in frequency, later hours, because that would build that ridership, and then I think the engagement would come. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, if the question is to a specific wish list, short term, I guess the first issue is for the bigger regional issue, what the stuff we're really talking about in motion. The conundrum that Metro or the MTA or the RTA finds itself in is the solutions require such big dollars that you're really looking at, okay, let's find something the public can rally behind and then identify ways to try to pay for it. As I've said to folks who've said, boy, we ought to be spending more on mass transit, I said, well, what do you want to cut, police or education? Because it really does get down to that strategic choice until you find ways to, to identify how to pay for it. The quick hit ones, though, are, and frankly, you touched on them, are extended service hours on key routes in particular, which is a relatively easier thing to do because you don't have to add fleet. We don't have to buy additional buses. You just run them longer. And then the other is frequency on a lot of those key routes. What we're finding in the market research is ideally for people, there's a lot of factors. The dependability factor that we talked about with Councilman Cooper's question, the speed factor, is it a competitive trip with how I can drive? And then it is that frequency factor. It's great, I know when the bus is coming, but if it says, oh, the bus is coming in 25 minutes, I'm probably going to get in my car and drive. So that frequency factor is the other, kind of magic bullet. Marion, I know you have strong thoughts on that too. So,
amen. More frequency and later at night are the first two things, in whichever order.
So have you all quantified, I mean, this is going to sound selfish, but, in West Nashville, so West End, Bellevue corridor, Hillsborough Pike into Green Hills, have you all quantified what it would mean operationally for you all to run those at every 20 minutes until 11 or 12 o'clock at night?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't know about going that late at night, but first of all, I do have to put a plug in because I live on West End, and we already have 10 to 15-minute headways or frequency
Right, I
until
guess
about 6.
I think a little further out, though, you've got the one turning at White Bridge coming, and so you're in frequency there, but a little further out, again, that traffic impact, the people in their cars in the suburbs, that are not choosing transit, and what can we do kind of incrementally to work that out to Bellevue, further out that 70-100 corridor in Green Hills. Have y'all looked at that kind of corridor by corridor?
What we looked at when we were initially putting together proposals was extended service and the frequency on what we would call our backbone routes. There's we run a total of 46 routes. And about 14 of those routes carry about 2/3 of the ridership.
Right.
So, and it's the ones you would imagine, the 3s and the 5s and the 7s and the 23s. Sorry, I speak in numbers. The Nolensvilles, the West End,
Right.
the Bordeaux's, the Clarksville Pikes, the, et cetera. And the extension, and we were looking at, 1, 2 in the morning, because frankly, a lot of what we get from service employees is,
Right.
you can get me to work, but I can't get home. And that was costing out at about $1.5 million, on an annualized basis. It's an expense that happens every year. The other piece for what I'll call the suburban choice commuter on the capital side is frankly the expansion and improvement of our park and ride program. Because most people, there are neighborhoods where people theoretically could walk to the route, but realistically, the further out you get, for choice riders, it's going to be, can I drive somewhere safely, park my car, well-lit, video monitored, et cetera, all the issues we were chatting about with Councilman Schulman, and then hop on very good, frequent service that's direct, to where I'm getting to. And the rule of thumb is if you were to look at, so when I ask these questions, when I would talk to you and then I'd go back to our folks and say, well, can we cost this out, is if you were to look at any segment in our system and say, well, I want to add frequency like this or what have you, the incremental cost is in the $80 to $90 an hour range, when everything is all in. There's some variation in that if we have to add a ton of fleet or what have you, but it's not really rocket science. It's, take the service you're looking at adding, multiply it by 80 or 90 bucks, and that's about the times, the days of how many days you want and how many hours, and that's sort of a good ballpark number. When we start chaining things together, we look to gain efficiencies in that, but that's a pretty good back of the envelope.
Okay. As it relates particularly to Green Hills, I'm going to ask a kind of Councilman Pulley and I question. So there, you have a big employment center, and then, so being able to get folks to work there is important. But also, I think you have a potential there to kind of combine employment center with choice ridership. There's conversations around a business improvement district in that area that could kind of, come in and sort of, partner potentially for enhanced services. I mean, you have the mall there, right, which is a huge destination for all our folks that are coming downtown to go to conventions and stay in downtown hotels. They want to come out to Green Hills and shop. Right. Councilman Pulley and I, see them kind of on the side of the road with their shopping bags, kind of standing looking at the bus stop like, because it doesn't run often enough to really make it functional. Maybe they Ubered out there and they kind of saw the bus stop and they thought, oh, we'll just take this back. Or I guess I understand the cart and the horse, and I understand that, if you don't have ridership there, it doesn't seem smart to spend the money there. But I really feel like with our aging population, our millennials. I mean, I live in a neighborhood where, you know, I've got a lot of people in my neighborhood off of Highway 100 at the 70-100 split. Like, they can get that bus line right to the Crystal at the intersection and, you know, cross the road where there's no crosswalk and walk to their house where there's no sidewalk. And they do it, you know, and it's not a high number, but the more people that see other people do it, it's you know, our communities are in transition. So, you know, people are making choices now, younger people, you know, around more kind of mixed use, you know, development on the corridor kind of stuff. So I just, you know, I would be interested to see if we can quantify some of those routes that you don't historically think of as high ridership, but if we could really, you know, partner with a business improvement district to enhance your transit shelters, you all increase the frequency, then we build that choice ridership and get those people out of their cars. You know?
Well, so you're absolutely going to see a lot of that coming out of, and frankly, between now through summer, we're going to be reaching out to every council member individually on what I'll call the early findings and early recommendations coming out of InMotion. So you've seen a lot of attention on what I'll call the big dollar stuff.
Right.
You know, where do we put light rail, or what do we do about commuter rail, or whatever the issue might be. But what's sort of embedded in all that is really, and what we keep repeating is, you can have the fanciest thing in the world. If it doesn't run often enough or late enough or fast enough, people aren't going to use it. They might try it once for the novelty,
Right.
but they're not going to do it routinely. And the and what we're calling the higher end solutions, you know, beyond whatever the cost might be for capital, is really moving in that direction in terms of frequency and duration of service, so that, you know, a Hillsborough Pike corridor, as an example, is one of those targeted corridors to see a major improvement in service. And there's about 14 or 15 of those corridors. And then it's using the technology that Councilperson Van Riesen was talking about to what I'll call fill in the gap. So rather than saying, well, we have to have a 40-foot bus running on every street, it's focusing the traditional mass transit service in those strong corridors that are relatively straight lines, and then using, you know, the on-demand types of services, even potentially growing and expanding the role of Access Ride in that regard to make those connections, so that you have, you know, with the technology, very seamless and smooth connections and payment systems to get you from one point to another, and then focusing really high, what I'll call high-quality services, frequent, fast, early, late, you know, 7 days a week in those very currently strong corridors. I mean, those corridors now are good, high ridership corridors, even without that, you know, massive infusion of folks who do drive.
Okay, I appreciate that. For Access Ride, could you tell me what's the cost per capita?
Cost per ride, or cost per
Well, I guess in my perception of, I guess way back during the campaign, you gave us a very informative presentation around the cost of Access Ride and how high that Access Ride ridership was, which I think speaks to the fact that people can't access the transit.
Right.
But I mean, the cost is pretty high for that. So while that is, I concur with Councilman Schulman, an important service, we want to serve our seniors. You know, as you all look at the partnerships, the Uber, the Lyft, that kind of stuff, you know, I mean, I looked at Access Ride and I was like, that cost a lot of money. You know, money that we could be putting into, you know, more frequency or, you know, sidewalks to get people to those routes and those kind of things. So I'd just be interested to know that number now,
right now
with this increase here.
We are in about the $45 per trip, $40 to $45 per trip range, which is relatively high.
Right.
They tend to, and when I say relatively high, I mean relative to, you know, other cities, other similar type systems. And some of that is, frankly, the dispersed nature. Our average trip lengths are fairly long, you know, so that's one of the things that contribute to that. You know, one of the things that's under consideration is that expansion. One of the things Nashville's done historically, and I think this is something the city should be very proud of, and you know, should definitely never change, is we have certain obligations under federal law on what we do with the Access Ride service. Nashville goes way above and beyond that. So, for instance, there's no federal requirement that we have Access Ride service in Jolton, but Nashville's had it, always had, hopefully always will. And that's a key piece of it. And because we're serving countywide, and some of those trips are and those are areas where that is the public transportation service, you know, for a population that really needs it. So because those trip distances are longer, it does tend to trend up, some of those costs.
And then are you all
Can I
mapping
just
the
make
access?
a comment about
Yeah.
that? Because just to underscore it, we've had, over my course at the MTA, as we should, have people come in and review our service and make recommendations about how we can be more efficient. And reducing the amount of access ride service we provide is usually, in fact, it's always the number one recommendation we get. And the board always says, no, this is a commitment that we feel that we should be providing this kind of service to everybody in the county that is unable, because of a physical or other disability, to use the Metro Transit Authority. regular bus
Absolutely. No, and I concur. For those who could not physically walk, but I wonder if we look at when we map the access ride, are we putting people or seniors, on that access ride bus that if they only had a sidewalk, they could get to,
And that's probably very true. And I know that we work with, we do a lot of things, a lot of creative things to try to keep the cost manageable. One is to work with people to teach them how to ride the bus.
Right, yeah.
But it is true that if you're a little bit frail and there is no sidewalk, you can't maybe walk to that bus stop, but if you had a quarter mile of the sidewalk to get to your bus stop, you probably could. But that's not something that in the short term we can deal with. We still are going to provide the trip, but now that we have better data, we can fold that into the sidewalk plan.
Okay.
I think the other thing I would point to on that and what we were talking about earlier in terms of the seamlessness of integration. So as we roll out real time and that sort of issue into Access Ride, and we talked about the potential, down the road integration of taxis and the rideshare folks to, connect trips. There is the opportunity, not for all clients, but for some. Frankly, the range of disabilities is very wide. So there are people, even if the sidewalk is there, might be a cognitive disability or what have you. But there's the potential of, well, okay, we'll have Access Ride pick you up at your home because you can't get there. But if you're going from Jolton to Antioch, maybe we take you to the closest bus stop to Jolton. You ride the regular system to Antioch. Maybe it's to an accessible location, or another van picks you up at the opposite end of the trip. And that's been done with relative success in a number of cities. It is a consumer adjustment period. Frankly, bus people and van people are kind of like cat people and dog people. They tend not to want to move from one to the other, but it is a potential opportunity in some cases.
Okay, and lastly, can you speak to, this came up with Public Works, the question around trash at the bus stops. Sometimes you don't even have a facility to put the trash into, and how does that kind of bear out
Sure.
from a budgetary standpoint?
So currently we have 7 maintenance staff who maintain all of our stops and shelters. We have over 3,000 bus stops. We're growing the shelters literally by the day. By the end of this year, we'll probably have 260 shelters in the system. So that's expanding rapidly. The target for that program is that and you heard Mark talking about the ongoing conversations we're having now about how we coordinate on that role. So I have to give a lot of credit to Public Works for the thought process there. And we are looking at, well, okay, if you guys would handle the trash stuff, then we can put more focus on keeping the shelter clean, repairing damage, whatever the case might be. So based on the 7 people currently, the standard is the trash is emptied once a week and a shelter's cleaned once a month. What we're finding on a number of the stops is we're actually changing out trash barrels now because they sort of came with a standard little thing, and it works fine at some stops, and in some stops, no, we need to supersize it. So we actually have new receptacles on order now to put out at some of those higher use stops. But the other thing I would say is, and I know this from some of the anecdotes, whether it's from council people or the mayor herself. So when I get that picture and we send somebody out, they say, damn, we were just there this morning and that trash got dumped. So part of it is, we have some success with the Adopt a Stop program where like a neighboring business kind of takes it on. Hey, it's in my best interest, to kind of make this thing look good. So those neighborhood partnerships are always good because I think, Mark Macy would probably tell you, I would certainly tell you that, boy, if you're going to depend on the MTA to keep your street clean, it's probably not an optimal solution. So if there's a partnership, but that's sort of what's going on in that realm now, and it is critically important. I heard you refer to it earlier as the dignity of riders, and it's absolutely right. I mean, the whole appearance of that. When you talk about barriers to transit ridership, the weakest link in the chain breaks the trip. So if it might be frequency, and it might be, oh yeah, there's my stop. Ooh, that doesn't look like a place I want to stand. That becomes extremely important.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. And with that, we have completed this budget hearing for the day. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all.